Today I'm going to talk about the oscillator drawing feature of the Roland S-1. This is something I rarely see being used, so I wanted to make a video to go over what it is and how it can open up your S1 to a range of new possibilities. This feature, while not being exactly hidden as it is on the front panel of the S1, can be a little confusing to use. Today I'm going to teach you how to use it and give you a few example patches using it in conjunction with the other oscillators. Oscillator Draw replaces a pulse or square waveform with a custom one that you can draw in yourself by inserting values from -100 to 100 over 16 sections. There are 3 settings that are related to this mode: switch, form, and multiple. Switch, or this sort of SA upside down A looking thing, gives you the option of having a sloped or stepped waveform value. It also has the value of off, which just means that you will not have the draw functionality on. A stepped waveform means that between every step, every section of that waveform, the value will step between. So if you have this at 0 and this at 100, it will be a hard step. A slope instead will interpolate between those two and apply smoothing to smooth that waveform out. Form is where you actually enter the step values to create your custom wave. And as you can see, there is already kind of a default wave that the S1 provides you, but I'll get more into that in a moment. The last setting is multiply or multiple. This lets you choose what multiple of that waveform you want to be duplicated across your single cycle waveform. Basically, whatever waveform you draw in here, how many of it is going to be in the oscillator that the S1 is actually generating. Effectively, it is pitching up your sound. Every double is another octave, so 2 is 1 octave up from the base waveform. 4 is 2 octaves up, all the way up until 32. So this gives some unique layering options that are pretty unique to the draw section. So let's actually draw in some different waveforms to get a better understanding of how this actually works. So the default wave when you switch to the oscillator draw mode on, and let's put it in slope mode, is a triangle wave actually. So right off the bat, you have a free triangle wave, and let's just give that a listen. Let's make sure everything else is off. Yeah, so as you can hear, we now have a triangle wave. You thought there was just the sub, the pulse, and the saw noise, but no, there's also a triangle in addition to everything else that you can draw in. So as I showed, this oscillator shape is being drawn in across these different values. And it's kind of confusing. It takes a lot of kind of trial and error to figure out what single cycle waveforms you can create by using this just 16 steps. But blinking means that they're negative. Dark blinking means they're closer to 0 but still negative. Completely dark is 0. Dark, it means they are, but not blinking means they're positive but not close to 100. And then very bright means they're very close to 100. And so as you can see, we have -100, -75, -50, -25, 0, 25, 50, and you can guess it kind of repeats. And that is how this triangle wave is being generated. So let's just... So it's a very smooth sound that is very different than, let's say, the much more harmonically rich saw wave. So it's very smooth, very nice to listen to. That could be great for pads. There's tons you can do with that. But let's actually draw in some other options as well. So here I'm going to have a sawtooth wave. And so basically how we draw this in, we're going to want to go to form. First of all, you're going to want to set your switch to slope, but then you're going to want to go to form. And I'll just interject real quick. You might be asking, why would I possibly want a sawtooth wave? There's already one right here. Well, if you don't know about super saws or stack saws, basically it's a even more harmonically rich form of a saw that kind of gets a lot fuller and just sounds really great. It's often used for kind of like buzzy leads or basses, kind of very bright. It's used in all sorts of different genres, very popular. And by being able to draw in your own saw, you can actually stack these two saws, and using the multiply, you can actually have them be different pitches, because normally these two oscillators would be pitched the exact same, but being able to use multiply, you can actually increase the pitch of that drawn in saw wave. And that gives you that super saw effect. So let's just go over what these values are. We have negative 100, negative 87, negative 75, negative 62, negative 50, negative 37, negative 25, negative 12, 0, 12, 25, 37, 50, 62, 75, and 87. And so that, if you just copy those in, you will then have a second saw as your custom oscillator. And so let's just give this a little bit of a listen. Here I will just pull out the new saw just to show you. And then I'm going to go in here, and I'm actually going to adjust the multiplication. Right now it's set to 2. See, even just there, with it not being pitched up an octave, it adds something for the first saw to kind of bounce off, because it's not a perfect saw like this one is. So it gives it a little something. And you can hear it getting pitched up higher and higher, all the way to 32. Let's just take it back down to 2. So, like I said, that is extremely useful. Let's just go over the patch that I've kind of created here. If you don't know, if you hold down pattern and adjust anything, it will show you exactly the value that makes up that. So we have the rate of this LFO set to 21. It is set to a reverse saw. Controlling the pitch LFO is 12. The range is set to 16. This custom oscillator is set to 255. The actual saw oscillator is set to 205. Sub is set to 0, which you can kind of play around with that to your taste, but sometimes the sub kind of overtakes the two saws. Noise is set to 0. Frequency is set to 216. Resonance 77. LFO controlling the filter frequency is 31. Envelope controlling the filter frequency is 109. Then our ADSR 24, 112, 0 for the sustain, and then a 41 for the release, which actually doesn't matter, I don't think, because the sustain is down to 0. And then we have a little bit of reverb. You can just play around with these. I'm not going to go too in depth on the reverb and delay, because these are kind of just basic patches. In addition to that, you can actually switch over to Unison mode, which will now layer 4 voices. It's going to layer these 2 saws 3 more times for each voice of the S1. And so let's just... So you can see how kind of thick it makes that super saw by using the Unison, because you're basically getting 8 saws stacked on top of each other. Those 2 bass saws that are detuned from each other by an octave, and then each one of those is getting, I don't know the exact amount that the Unison on the S1 does, but basically some amount is being pitched away from those 2 oscillators and then being duplicated 3 more times. So you're getting a really quite a thick sound from this S1 there. Going into, and another thing you could always do is throw in some chorus. I think I have chorus 2 on here. I admittedly do not use the chorus that much on the S1. It's probably my least favorite part about the S1. I wish it just had a little more control and a little more, maybe like a dry wet sort of control. Sometimes I feel like it muddies the waters a little too much. Let's do another kind of variation on this theme. Let's go down 2 octaves. Let's see, 16. And then we're gonna multiply this. Let's go all the way up to 12. I was playing around with this earlier, so let's see if it sounds good. We're then going to turn, sub off, noise off. See how much that Unison thickens up that sound? Not to get too crazy, but that's kind of just another direction that you could take this particular patch. All right, moving on, I have a little more of a kind of classic warm analog bass sort of sound. It's a little more punchy, warm, full body, and that sort of thing. So let's actually get into it. This is on 313. I'm not really prepared to play anything live, so I'm just kind of messing around. But basically, let's get into the drawing of the actual waveform. I have it set to slope. I then have this set to -100, -100, and this is kind of a weird one, so just bear with me. Another -100, -50, -50, 0, 0, 100, 100, 100, 50, 50, 50, 50, 0, and 0. Like I said, a lot of these I kind of have just played around with tons of values and to see what sounds good. There are tons of different options. I mean, you have anywhere between -100 and 100 for all 16 of these steps. So you can get really crazy. The one thing I will warn about is you can kind of overemphasize some like harmonics and kind of make, there's a lot of room for making bad sounds as well as good sounds. So I've played around with a lot, and these are kind of some of the safer waveforms that I've used. But feel free, try out some things. If you find something that sounds really good, please let me know. I'm always interested to hear about what you guys put together. So, all right, let's go over this patch. We have a rate LFO 42 set to a triangle, controlling the pitch at 8. We're set to 16, but you could honestly probably do it at 32 as well. We have the custom waveform all the way up, the saw waveform at 180, sub all the way up, but play around with it if you think it's too heavy. The noise is at 32. Filter frequency we have at 116. Resonance I have at 48. LFO controlling the frequency is at 62. Envelope controlling the frequency is at 138. And then attack, very quick, 5. Decay, 101. Sustain, 55. So we've got a decay envelope. And then a release of 27. And also, I almost forgot to mention, I have it set to -2 octaves on the sub-oscillator. One thing to note, which I haven't mentioned yet, is that pulse width is removed when you use a custom oscillator. Obviously, you're not using a pulse oscillator anymore. You're using whatever this single cycle waveform you draw in. And so both pulse width depth and pulse width modulation source both get removed as options. And so let's also just use you could also throw on a little portamento. I have it set to 1. If I use portamento, it's usually a very low amount. And then I have it set to poly, but you can also throw this in either Unison to get an even bigger, fatter sound, or mono if you don't want that detuned effect. Great, so that is the kind of analog-based sort of sound. I think there's also, no, there's no chorus on that. Like I said, effects, I'm not going to go into too much, just because you can kind of use whatever you like. All right, the next waveform that we're going to be covering is a sine wave. If you watched my Tycho video, you probably saw me entering this in. I think I actually mentioned this video in it. I made that video. I started working on this video before I started on the Tycho video, and then things just got a little crazy with me moving. And so I've been all turned about, and that's why I've been a little bit behind on getting out videos. Anyway, so this, I think, just gets a really good, you can get a very good E piano sort of sound, add a little bit of LFO, sort of like random LFO control over the pitch. Not that much. It's actually good. That's why sometimes part of my poor playing. Like I said, I haven't practiced any sort of live performance for this demo. But anyway, there's lots you can do with this sort of E piano sound. You can obviously mix it with a bit of a saw wave to get a more harmonic E piano sounding thing. You can also switch this over to a stepped mode. If you remove that saw, you almost get a more of an FM sort of bell sound, which I think is very, very nice. Let's add that saw back in a little bit. Let's put a little sub in there. So there's lots you can do with this sine wave. I mean, you can look at anything, any sort of sound design tutorial and see what you can do with sine waves. But it's very nice that typically, how I've seen most people do it is they would just use a square wave, and then you filter that down to get a sort of sine approximation. And I think that sounds okay, but let me just switch it over back to being on. You can really tell that you're actually playing a sine wave instead of just a filtered down square wave, and that also lets you open up the filter a lot more than you would be if you were just filtering down a square wave. I really do like this sort of stepped mode. If you put a little more random, you get almost a, not quite, but you get kind of a very realistic sort of percussive texture that I think just sounds so nice and can be used for lots of different things. So I highly recommend checking this one out as well. So that's going to be it for this sort of introduction to the Oscillator Draw functionality. I have a handful of patches planned where I actually use these in more in-depth patches. I know these were sort of high level and, you know, a little faster than my typical patch breakdown. I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of what you might be able to use these for so that you can start implementing them yourself. I think just being able to add in, a triangle wave, a sawtooth wave. I can't remember exactly what that little analog bass sort of wave was. I think it was just kind of a very like pulsed over sort of like rounded square wave. And also a sine wave. I think those just give you a lot of sound design options that you don't have with the default S1 settings. And I personally, if I'm kind of getting tired with the S1 sound, I will program in one of these waves that I figured out, and then basically just spend hours trying to figure out how far I can push it and make use of that new sound. So I hope you enjoy. I'll be putting out a video very soon that uses one of these custom custom waves. And if you want to support me on my Patreon, I put more stuff out on there. It's easier for me to put sort of quicker and easier, such as like live demos or kind of things I'm working out on there. They also get early access to things, as well as having a patch reference sheet where I put all of this information, every single patch I've done, in addition to some patches that aren't on the YouTube yet or may never make it because I never thought they're ready. So if you want to support me there, feel free. If not, I just am happy that you're watching these, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks.